Since last time I put out a video on an indie game, the game in question being a completely terrible and borderline unplayable indie game, I feel it's only fair to follow that up by discussing a better example of what the indie game market is capable of producing. I think if there's one stereotype that has historically had some merit to it when it comes to the indie game market, it's that a lot of them, not all of them, but a significant number of them tend to conform to what we might think of as the Hallmark movie approach to storytelling. You introduce a likable character with initially a vague background, then gradually introduce this melancholy or sad story that explores certain emotional themes before ultimately bringing it full circle at the end with some moral lesson or instance of moral ambiguity. And this is definitely true, at least in part, in regards to the game we'll be discussing today, by the name of Lost Words Beyond the Page. But that's not the reason I picked this game for today's review. I don't have a huge problem with games incorporating one or more popular narrative or gameplay cliches, as long as the game in question actually builds upon those fundamentals and delivers something unique. And that is something I think Lost Words Beyond the Page actually capitalizes on. As this is a very story-driven game, I don't want to go into it beyond the most basic of explanations. You play as a young girl named Isabel, with the game being told entirely from her perspective, as she writes in her journal.
Hello, journal. Since I was little, I've always dreamed of becoming a writer. We went to see Gran today, in the hospital. I want to write a story.
The game's narrative mainly focuses on Isabel's relationship with her grandmother, who's getting older and gradually develops some health-related issues. And parallel to this, we follow Isabel's journey as she works through the 7 stages of grief. For those unfamiliar with the clinical term, I'll circle back and elaborate more on that later. What I found really compelling about the game was the visual style and somewhat unique gameplay mechanics. The game is split into 2 portions, Isabel's diary entries and the fantasy novel she is writing. During the diary entries, the player has to navigate a series of 2-dimensional platforming puzzles, accompanied by 1 or more environmental puzzles. In a nutshell, if I had to make a comparison, the best analogy would be, imagine playing Portal as a side-scrolling 2D platformer. The puzzles are very easy to solve and rely mainly on the player's linguistic skills. Yes, you heard me right, you have to use words to solve puzzles. Over the course of the game, you attain various words that you can collect in your compendium for future use. In order to proceed through the levels, oftentimes you need to drag and drop certain words from the compendium towards the object you're focusing on in order to rewrite reality to your liking. This can vary from destroying various objects in your way, to repairing broken objects, to elevating platforms to help you reach higher areas, etc. You can even stand on top of the words you pull out, using them as a kind of platform, which can be useful at times during the diary sequences. As most people who followed me on YouTube or Twitter for any length of time will probably know already, I'm studying English literature from my university degree with the intent to teach the subject academically later in life. So I'm definitely a little biased in terms of my appreciation for the English language, as well as, this rather unorthodox gameplay mechanic. I think the idea of using the English language itself as a means of progressing further in the game to be a very interesting one. And I know there are games out there that have done similar things, like those typing games almost all of us 90s kids were forced to play by our parents, where you have like 4 seconds to type this 22-character long word before you're killed by a group of low-quality textured zombie enemies. But Lost Words never felt to me like it was using this unique mechanic as a gimmick. Not that you can argue it was still a gimmick, one could argue almost any game that revolves around mainly one mechanic makes that mechanic a gimmick, but I never got that impression from Lost Words. The visual style is beautiful, and the voice acting is surprisingly decent. In these kinds of games, both of these factors can be somewhat hit or miss, but I was pleasantly surprised with how impressed I was with both. The puzzles are fairly easy, but still very enjoyable nevertheless. I do wish the game leaned a bit more in the puzzle direction rather than focusing so much on making the game a narrative-driven cakewalk. It teeters strongly on the edge between being a game you play and being a game that plays out for you. However, one aspect I didn't find quite as satisfying as the rest was the incorporation of choice-based storytelling. On the surface level, there are lots of opportunities to influence the story based on your personal choices, but ultimately they all kind of lead you in the same direction, with only the smallest of variations and deviances. It's effectively the Telltale method of choice-based storytelling, and I do believe that works to the game's disadvantage slightly. If you're going to present the player with some amount of free agency over how the story plays out, actually make an effort to commit to that. Don't pull a "this action may have consequences" label on the screen as Telltale does, while never actually delivering any notable consequences whatsoever. I don't think everyone watching this is going to share my relative enjoyment of this particular game, and I'm fine with that. Again, it's not one of those games that I think was originally intended for the gaming masses as a whole, but for a very specific audience. But I do believe, bare minimum, we should all acknowledge and respect the innovation and creativity of the developer behind this game. So many games, including puzzle games, rely strongly continually on reusing the same handful of mechanics that it almost takes me aback somewhat when a developer decides to add something fairly new, or at the very least not currently commonly practiced by other similar games, into the mix. On that note, that's where I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. Let me know what you think of Lost Words in the comments section down below. One of the most wonderful and appealing aspects to PC gaming, as opposed to literally any other single gaming platform on Earth, is the near boundless and unfettered access to indie games and indie developers, not only on Steam, but on a number of other excellent platforms and websites. You'd be lucky to find a few hundred indie games on PlayStation 4 or the Nintendo Switch, and arguably the vast majority of them are PC re-releases anyway, in the sense that they start off on PC and then port to console later on. But on PC, you have access to tens of thousands just on Steam, Epic, Origin, and GOG alone, not including the internet itself at large. But while the number of indie games out there is insane, it can be hard to shovel through the garbage to find the smaller number of gems that stand out among the trash heap. If there's two things I hope to accomplish on this channel aside from long-term growth and income, it's exposing people to different kinds of games, something outside your normal wheelhouse, and secondarily encourage people to hold a higher regard for critical thinking. If you want to support the work I do in this channel, do consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notifications when a new video goes live. I record new game reviews, first impressions, and other gaming critique-related content every week. As we're still just barely in the second quarter of 2021, there hasn't been an enormous number of interesting games to review. However, I do expect as we get further into the year, the game release calendar will start to ramp up once again. That said, this is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody. Stay safe and peace out.